My name is Joel Hartman. I'm from Medtronic, and a little bit of our slogan here, our tagline, engineering the extraordinary. And if you haven't heard of Medtronic, I think you're in for an interesting presentation. I think you'll find out at the end we actually do engineer the extraordinary as we kind of some of our opportunities in the medical device space is helping a lot of patients, and you'll see that as we go through this. So my name is Joel Hartman. I'm a distinguished engineer. I've been with Medtronic for about 18 years. If you don't know Medtronic, we'll talk about that a little bit here. This is going to be interactive on some level. So show of hands, who's heard of Medtronic before? Perfect. Yeah, not everybody, and that's okay. As I've interacted with folks through my career at Medtronic, I've found out that people either have a very good understanding of it, especially because they're from Minnesota and that's where Medtronic is founded. Other people don't have so much experience with it. It is a med tech company, primarily founded with implantable medical device technology. We're not a pharmaceutical company, so it's really technology, implantable medical device technology for the most part. So we'll have an intro video here that will kind of introduce you from a patient's perspective what they think of Medtronic as they've received some of our products and how it's helped them out. But before we get into that, we're a global company. We're roughly a $10 billion company. We're present worldwide. We have about 100,000 employees worldwide, and we reach a lot of patients. You may not see our products in patients, but that's by design. A lot of our products are designed in such a way that the patients may not even know that they have one, or they may forget that they have a medical device. So we transform the lives of 2 people every second, every hour of every day. So we touch a lot of folks. Our medical devices are out there globally, and they touch a lot of folks. So let's take a real quick look at this video here that, again, will give you the feel from a patient's perspective on how our medical devices impact their lives.
I mean, I've always felt like I was healthy, but when I found out that I had cancer, I didn't know what I'd be able to accomplish later, if anything. I didn't know if I'd even survive it.
Ruby's a very bright little girl, very intelligent. Ruby's developed scoliosis, means that she hasn't got enough muscle strength to hold her spine straight.
My heart just hurt. It felt like pins and needles in the heart, not the good pins and needles.
The stroke was there. I was completely paralyzed on the right side. There was a 95% chance that I wouldn't walk again.
Então, primeira coisa, pegou o braço direito. Aí pegou a perna, o pescoço.
I was diagnosed with scoliosis at age 11. At that point, I was a top state swimmer in Connecticut. I had to quit swimming. I was in pain all the time.
Even though diabetes never got in the way of me feeling like I could do things that my siblings and my peers were doing, it really did affect how I felt.
He wasn't walking as nicely as he always was. They performed an MRI scan, but he was diagnosed with Leig's disease. He was diagnosed in May last year. In September, he just stopped breathing.
Fear and shock engulfed me. I had to be very careful not to bruise badly because I could bleed out.
To me, after being so active, really wasn't worth living, to live under those conditions.
After I started the pump, it was very life-changing for me.
2 stents were placed in my heart. This enabled me to work more energetically.
To find out that there was a procedure that could stop that, I am so grateful.
Kind of music to any 11-year-old's ears when they no longer have to give themselves 8 shots a day.
It was the best thing that we had ever done. By a month post-op, I was feeling fantastic.
I want the word to be out among the medical community about what Solitaire is and what it can do.
I have a pacemaker. It just feels normal.
Então, depois que eu fiz a cirurgia do DBS, mudou praticamente tudo na minha vida.
I just didn't have any of the fatigue or anything that was going on, and I had it done on a Thursday, and I refereed soccer indoor on Saturday.
We placed him on the home care vent. He calls it his spooky, so he's named his little ventilator, and now he's happily at home and doing very, very well.
Me colocaron el neuroestimulador hace 2 años y volví a vivir.
To this day, I keep running my fingers over where the loop is. I can't believe how your device helped save my life.
The technology has been such a life-changing piece for me. It really makes day-to-day living so much easier.
Ich fühle mich sehr gut jetzt. Mein Blutdruck ist einwandfrei. Und ich kann wieder die Treppen steigen, was ich früher nicht konnte. Also luftmäßig war sehr schlecht, aber jetzt geht es wieder ganz gut.
Gut, gut.
Ja, wir sind zufrieden.
It'll be a much easier recovery. Things could have been different for me.
Before, I couldn't hold my head and I couldn't balance. I needed someone to hold me. But now I can just hold my head normally and balance.
So that's a little intro into at least some of the impact that our products have on patients. We have a wide market. We have a lot of different implantable medical devices. You saw a lot of our medical devices kind of in practice there with some of the patients giving their testimonies on how it's impacted their lives. If you look at this chart here, it's really an eye chart, and it's really not meant for folks to kind of look through and say, oh, there's something very specific that I may be interested in. The idea here is that Medtronic here, in our product delivery, we have a lot of devices, and we treat, the slide here says more than 70 conditions. It's actually many more as you kind of permutate out all of the features of all of the devices that we deliver. And you can kind of see here on this slide here, there's cardiovascular, diseases related to the heart and the cardiovascular system, medical surgery, surgical robotics, where physicians aren't even doing surgery, we have robots doing the surgery. Neuroscience, some of the patients' testimonies that were given in the video were on deep brain stimulation and things like that. There's actually an interesting product that we have out on the market. It's called Tibial Health, where there's a neurostimulator that gets attached to your ankle. It stimulates. It helps with incontinence. The human body's interesting. Why that happens, I don't know, but they can stimulate here on the ankle for incontinence. But anyway, over 60% of our products right now have some sort of semiconductor in them. I'm an IC designer at Medtronic. That's a lot of the work that I do. That's my primary discipline. So for my work, a lot of it's related to the semiconductor area. So a lot of our products here have over 60% semiconductor parts. 30% of those products require custom ICs, something that we can't buy off the shelf, something that we actually have to design internally for very specific product needs, whether it's size and shape, whether it's current drain, power, longevity, things like that. And we'll talk about some of that as we go through this presentation. You might ask, well, why? What is the specific target application we might have for semiconductor development or specifically IC development? I have some product examples here that I will start to show. Did that show up? Can we actually see this? Perfect, yeah. And so the target application, so for implantable medical devices. So I'm going to put some products up here on this overhead here, and folks can come up afterwards and take a look at them. But we have a couple of products here that I'm going to show, and they do amazing things. These are life-sustaining therapeutic devices. This larger device here will actually deliver a high voltage shock to the heart for patients that have a high heart rate or need defibrillation on the order of 700, 800 volts or 30 or more joules. These devices here are pacemakers, where they'll actually watch the patient's heart and make sure that it beats at least at a minimum rate for patients that have a very low heart rate. And this here is a cardiac monitor. So what do we do with these? Why do these have the need for custom electronics or custom semiconductors? Mostly because of the size and the shape and the longevity of the devices. And we'll talk about that here as we go through some of these other slides. Also, some of the challenges that we face with these devices is these devices are always with the patient. Like these devices here, this one in particular, gets implanted in this area up here around the shoulder. And the patients don't have the convenience of, if they go into a noisy environment, they can take this out and set it aside, do their work, get an MRI, get an X-ray, whatever that might be, and then put the device back on. They actually have to wear this into those environments. So for designing into those environments, making sure that they're MRI capable, X-ray capable, even EMI from like a cell phone, making sure that it's aware of that and it doesn't impact the therapy delivery for these devices. So those are some of our challenges. Some cardiac device examples. I mentioned here, this device here, very specifically, is the ICD, we call it, an implantable cardio defibrillator. I'll hold it here so you can kind of see it too. It's kind of relative size here. These devices here, that I'll kind of put on the screen, these are pacemakers. The difference between this larger device here, you can kind of see the size differences here. This device here, again, watches the patient's heart and makes sure that it's always beating at a normal rate and it doesn't get too fast. What this device will do is it'll look at the patient's heart. If the patient's heart is beating too fast, say 200 beats per minute, it may give them a shock. If the patient's heart is fibrillating, meaning it's quivering and not actually doing any work, it may give them a higher voltage shock. Normally your heart rate is at about 60 beats per minute, maybe down to 40 beats per minute if you're into exercise, things like that. And so normally 200 beats per minute is really way too high. This device here, the smaller device, is really a pacemaker. So that's on the other side of the equation where a patient may have a low heart rate, like 18 beats per minute. This device will watch the patient's heart and make sure that it's always beating at a minimum rate. So if it goes below that 60 beats per minute, it'll start to pace at maybe 8 volts to be sure that the patient's heart maintains a minimum rate. This device here is the same thing. This is also a pacemaker. We'll talk about this as we go through the presentation. These devices here are effectively the same devices. They deliver the same therapy. They have the same features, but you can kind of see the differences in the sizes. And we'll talk about the challenges around going from a device the size of this to the device at the size of this from an engineering challenge perspective. Why is that hard? Another device here is this one here, and you can kind of see it. This is implanted, and that's typically implanted right around this area. It's got 2 electrodes here at the end of the device. This one doesn't deliver therapy. It's an implantable cardiac monitor. And what this device does is it watches the patient's biometrics, heart rate activity, motion activity, and logs that. Because a lot of times patients will come in and they're not symptomatic when they go into the office. They may tell the physicians, I fainted last week. I stood up too fast and I fainted. I don't know what happened. And so when they go into the office, the physician's office, and they're not symptomatic, it's hard to diagnose. And so those patients might have those episodes once a month, once a year, or maybe even more infrequent. And so the patient might get this device that has a 15-minute sampling buffer. So it has a history of 15 minutes. So if a patient has an episode, it can log 15 minutes of data and present that to the physician. So the physician can look at that and say, oh, you had a tachycardia event, and you might need this device. Or you had a bradycardia event, meaning low heart rate, and you needed a device like this. So this is really a monitor device to help physicians diagnose further what a patient might need. And the patient might need some drugs or something like that, some beta blockers. So this is an example of some of the technology or devices that come through the group that I work in at Medtronic. Again, so I'm in the IC design group. All these implantable medical devices come through the group that I work in, and we develop custom ICs for these devices. Some of the challenges that I mentioned, so I kind of alluded to it, some of the challenges here, which is going from this device to this. Same feature set, but a small device. So we have challenges in taking the electronics. If I open the hood on this, if I open the can on this and looked at it, you'd see the electronics take up a small little footprint in here. Well, that footprint, the size of the aspect ratio of those electronics would take up this entire device, roughly. If I set that on top of it, you can kind of see that, the electronics here. So those are some of our challenges, to shrink the electronics down. That's a challenge. We'll talk about what those challenges are in an upcoming slide. Also, kind of packaging, changing the packaging around. So this is definitely a different package, different material than what's in this device. And so coming at it from that perspective. So I'm an electrical engineer working at Medtronic. I'm talking about some electronic challenges. There's also multiple discipline challenges in these devices right here. The packaging is a challenge. This header material, as you come up after class, you can kind of feel this header material. It's a different material. So material science comes into designing these products and then downsizing them to get into here. Electrochemical science in the batteries. Going from the battery from this size of the device down to this side of the device is a challenge for us when we downsize electronics. Making our devices smarter, going to the next column, is another challenge for us. So in reality here, if we look at the heart specifically, what I'm talking about here, as an entity from a disease state perspective, it hasn't changed. If you look back 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, the heart and its disease states really hasn't changed much. But what has come a challenge for us is trying to penetrate a lot of the market. If you look at the total disease state that any human can get and the penetration from a medical device perspective, it's a really small percentage. There's a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons is because a lot of the devices that are out there can't treat or can't detect all of those disease states. So as we evolve technology around these devices, one of those things is to try to understand what those disease states are and then try to treat those. So making the devices smarter with advanced DSP algorithms. It's not a stretch to, with all of the artificial intelligence that's being discussed right now, to understand that the medical device companies are looking into artificial intelligence, edge computing, tiny ML and things like that to get those algorithms into executables that can operate on the devices. Also sensor development. So these devices here have a number of sensors in them, electrical sensors, mechanical sensors, power sensors. You know, these devices here have accelerometers in them, 3-axis accelerometers that are used for multiple reasons. One of which is being able to just detect that the patient's walking, and it can do a rate response for the patients that have a low heart rate and actually increase their heart rate if they're moving around. So coming up with new use cases for these for the sensors that are in the devices. And then technology nodes. We'll talk about that, like IC technology nodes. Why is that a challenge? But for us to go from an electronics footprint in this size of a device down to this size of a device, it's very challenging. It means we have to shrink the electronics with the same feature set. With that become competing constraints from a design perspective, and we'll talk about those. Making the devices simpler. And what I mean by that is, as we evolve, it's not too long ago that a lot of the devices here were very hard to communicate with. What I mean by that is we had a very custom proprietary communication mechanism that only offered real-time analysis. So when the patients went into the office, a physician would hang a telemetry head over the device, and it could only real-time communicate. So a point-in-time sample of how the patient was feeling. Now, we have long-range communication, and we have storage capability on the devices. So now we can take and actually store episodes on the device, like I mentioned with this, and these devices are Bluetooth capable. So they can Bluetooth data up to your phone, up to your tablet, and relay that into the Medtronic healthcare system, CareLink, and forward that to the physician, so the physician can actually look at that and sort of real-time monitor patients and give them feedback. If they need to come in the office, if they need device configuration changes, things like that. Size. I mentioned that on a previous slide here. And so you know, kind of why is that a challenge here for us? I mentioned a couple aspects of this. The outcomes of that is actually being able to give feedback to some of our disciplines as far as requirements to design smaller devices. Again, from the same feature perspective, an implantable pacemaker has to pace a patient at 60 beats per minute. This has to do the exact same thing. The reason you might ask, why do we want to go from this device to this device? I'm not actually showing the entire device when I show you this. It probably won't fit on there. This is the entire device. And so how this is typically implanted is it's implanted up here, and this lead here is kind of threaded through the venous system and implanted into the right ventricle of the heart, where it delivers therapy to the patient. So this is the entire system when I talk about this device here. So why would we want to go to a smaller device like this? Lots of reasons. This device here, from simply a visual perspective, you can actually see it. You know, for slimmer patients, this actually protrudes from the body. And it's not so bad with this device, but if you look at this device, it's fairly large, so you can really see that. Also from a complications perspective, these are mechanical devices, and the heart beats, patients move. These wires, these are physical conductor wires inside this poly coating. These wires can break. So from a reliability perspective, there's advantage of eliminating this. And this is a leadless pacemaker. So this doesn't even have a lead. And it's also implanted directly into the heart, so completely invisible from a cosmetic perspective. So those are some of the reasons why we want to go to smaller devices. And some of the opportunities that exist within Medtronic are even making these smaller than they are today. So moving beyond this. Longevity. So I mentioned that. Trying to keep some of the same longevity requirements the same between these two devices. This slide shows here, there's a lot of data on this slide, but what this is really meant to say is the challenge that we face from an IC perspective, electronics perspective, but also from a battery chemical perspective, is these devices have to last a long time. You can kind of see here, 15 years, 16 years on these devices. That's a long time. We don't have the opportunity of recharging these devices. There's no way to recharge. This is what we call a primary cell device. There's a battery that's installed in this device at manufacturing, and it's a battery that will last the rest of the device life. So when a patient gets one of these devices, it lasts or has to last at least 15 years. And it may last longer depending on programming settings and things like that, but 15 years. So changing this out becomes a challenge. We can't recharge it. So those are some of the challenges that we have. Going from a device size like this to a device size like this, again, is a challenge because this has a larger battery, much smaller battery. This is about a 1 amp hour battery. This is about a 180 milliamp hour battery, again, with the same feature set. I've talked a lot about this device here, and I'll hold it up. It's hard to see probably from the back row, but if you look at it here, you can kind of see it. There's a lot of features associated with this. This is what we call Micra, and it's a leadless pacemaker. It was first in the market from a leadless pacemaker perspective. Medtronic was the first to release it. There's other competitors out there now, and we're evolving this technology now. So now we're trying to make it a dual chamber device, things like that. There's other dual chamber devices out there too. This is a little background on how that device came to be and some of the challenges around bringing a product like that to market. So we have a video to show that.
Everything we have done is done for the first time.
There was no existing design that even came close.
New battery, it's new electronics, new fixation, new way to deliver.
To be able to do this in such a relatively short period of time was amazing.
Micra TPS officially began in 2009.
The whole goal of the project was to eliminate complications. So if we could actually make the device small enough to put in the heart, then we could eliminate the pocket complications and the lead complications.
There was a good understanding that we had the right battery technology and the right electronics technology to be able to try to miniaturize.
We could shrink the electronics and yet still be able to deliver all the features that conventional systems have.
All of that kind of built confidence that this could be real.
It's not a question of can it be done, it's just a question of what's going to take to get it done.
Micra has been tested far more than any other product that I'm aware of.
Everything bench test-wise was more or less developed from scratch.
The Micra fixation is actually the most novel component of the device.
Very early in the design process, we said, this thing cannot dislodge.
Once we proved fixation worked, that was the aha moment. We realized that Micra could really make a difference for patients.
As little, as small and elegant as it looks like, it is a very complicated device.
You can describe Micra, but until you see the actual impact on a patient or the way the physicians and patients react, it's really difficult to appreciate the real power behind this innovation.
Their expression was just of awe on, wow, how did you do this?
When they see the patient with the fluoro and that little device inside the heart, they understand that that's the future, and there's no turning back.
Micra enables the patient to forget for a while that they actually have a cardiac disease.
We've had patients who've heard about it, and they'll come to the doctor and they'll say, I want the pacemaker you can't see.
I've been privileged to be at these implants, and to actually see this come to life and make a difference for a patient is incredible. It's the best.
So that's a little background on this device we call Micra. And you'll kind of notice here, somebody mentioned the development started around 2009. That seems like a long time ago, and it is. It actually takes us a long time in the medical device industry to release a product. This product's been out on the field for quite a while, but just to kind of give you a sense of feel it does take us quite a while from concept to product delivery to deliver these sorts of products. A lot of testing involved, a lot of analysis that's involved, a lot of clinical studies that are involved before we can actually do a product release. And because it was such a new and novel design, kind of a lot of new use cases and taking primary delivery system capability out of the equation as far as the medical device goes, we had a lot of questions that we needed to answer during the concept phase of creating this product. One of which I've talked about a lot is initially here, the question was, can it actually last 8 years? Again, taking a device of this size and shrinking it down to that and keeping the same features, can it actually last 8 years? So that was a challenge to the design team. Again, not just electrical, but the design team in total, battery folks, mechanical folks, electrical folks, software folks, firmware folks. Can we fit all the electronics into the package size? Again, taking those chips from a custom IC design perspective and shrinking them down to fit into that package size. Can we communicate? So this device here communicates to an instrument. The implant location is different. I mentioned these devices get implanted just subcutaneously here, easy for a near field communication. This device gets implanted deep inside the heart, 3 to 5 centimeters down beneath the skin. Much more challenging from an NFC near field communication perspective. NFC is inductive, kind of requires coil, like a coil aperture opening for communication. Not a lot of opportunity for an inductive coil here in this packaging size. So deeper implant, smaller antenna in this design becomes even more of a challenge. So those were questions that we needed to answer when we were designing this product. Can we actually get the device to reside in the heart and pace? So this tissue interface, completely new. So as we kind of come up and look at this, you can kind of see this tissue interface. There's an electrode here at the center, and then this is the other side of the electrode, those tines. It's different than this tissue interface, which we traditionally had. So can it actually sustain and stay connected to the heart and not dislodge? Because keep in mind, if this is now inside the heart, if it dislodges, it becomes a problem. It's actually in the circulatory system. So can it actually do that? Can it actually stay and deliver therapy to the patient? Can it be safe in different environmental conditions? So again, different location in the body, different environmental use conditions, and then can it actually have all these same features in such a small package? Sensing, pacing, and then also rate response and communication. One of the biggest challenges here, not the biggest challenge, but one of the biggest challenges here was just the low power electronics. And we've talked about this a lot, but just kind of getting the IC technology to a different node for us to downscale the electronic size. Competing challenges here with dropping the IC technology to a smaller footprint, increases current drain, batteries smaller, kind of managing that longevity like I showed if it's got to last 8 years, 10 years, 15 years is a challenge. And then kind of different use cases for the accelerometer in this. It's implanted in a different location. Does the accelerometer respond in the same way for a rate response device? Lots of challenges with going forward with this. Real quick background on my journey. Some of it was brought up here at the intro. Kind of give a background on kind of how I got into the work that I'm doing today. Distinguished engineer, I really don't know what that means. I can tell you what I do, but it's a title. I get the opportunity to lead a lot of the technical team. I still do technical work, but I lead a lot of the technical teams now coming through the group that I work in. I did my education here in Minnesota, St. Cloud State University, bachelor's degree, master's degree from the same program. I started my career off at a company called Unisys, straight out of college. And I was leaning in towards computer architecture. That was my coursework as in the university. And that's what I did at Unisys. Very different than what I'm doing at Medtronic. Big, huge, high-performance computing platform, enterprise class servers. I was doing proprietary processor design, superscalar, super pipeline processor design. I got into cache coherency protocol design, big, huge ICs, millions and millions of gates. That market started to dry up. It became commodity, so I decided to look elsewhere. I went to Medtronic, completely different design space. Went from not caring how much power my circuits took to counting every coulomb, every nanoamp that my circuits, because they have to last 15 years. So completely different design space, completely different challenge, but a fun one. Really enjoy it. A lot of my interests, this got mentioned earlier, education, just continuously learning, continuously evolving the things that I'm interested in. I mentioned I went to school, kind of focused on computer architecture. That was where my interest lay. If you'd asked me my first couple years at Unisys, medical device, Medtronic, are you interested? I probably would have said no. But once I got in there, changed my interest. Dynamically changed my interest. Got involved with it, started learning. Very interesting work. Do-it-yourselfer. I do almost anything at home, projects, renovation projects, things like that. Very interested in that. Just kind of looking forward. So some of the things that I've asked myself as I've gone through the journey of my career is kind of leaning into your interests. What excites you? These are the questions I asked myself as I kind of went into college. I wasn't always aware that I was asking myself these questions, but as I look back on my career, my growth, I was unconsciously, subconsciously asking myself these questions. What excites me? What keeps me up at night? What gets me up early in the morning? I mentioned earlier as I was talking to some of the folks, in the work that I do right now, I find myself sometimes I'm at work at 4 o'clock in the morning. I might be at work at 10 o'clock at night because it's very interesting. I'm doing stuff that I really like. And so as I kind of started to pick my coursework at my first couple years at the university, I leaned into my interests. And then as I got into my course program, my final course program, and even my career and my internships, I leaned into what I was interested in. And I continually evolved that as I worked this. And here I am today. So kind of a final wrap up to this here is just a short little video on where Medtronic is looking forward to and what are some of our other opportunities as we look forward into the next decade or so.
How far will you go? When a little girl's heart has trouble beating. When a family who needs quality care can't afford it. When a whole health system is feeling under the weather and a chronic disease threatens millions. How far could we go? If we put our egos aside and put our ideas on the table, if we pushed the boundaries of technology, shared our research, worked outside of silos and across borders, if we partnered with each other, if we listened to our collective minds and hearts. The fact is, there's only one way to take the world of healthcare further. And that's together. How far will you go to help change the world of healthcare? Medtronic. Further together.
That's it. This is a Q&A session now?
Yeah, thank you, Joel. If any of the students have any questions, please raise your hand. Does anyone have a question to start us out with?
Hi. I was wondering, how long does the development of one of the new chips take from concept to ready to be put in one of the devices?
Yeah, it's a good question. The IC design portion of a project like any one of these laying on the table is actually a small, so if you kind of think of the project development for one of these, it's long. the IC design individual piece of it is pretty small. So we can do an IC design from concept to tape out, initial tape out, in a year or so. From here are the requirements, do the circuit design, simulate the circuit design, tape it out, about a year. Typically we go through multiple increments of that from concept to final product delivery. For us to do a project like an ICD, a Micra device, that can be a long time, multiple years and multiple IC iterations.
Anyone else? Yep.
So you said like you can't charge the batteries, but are there like
Right.
any new technologies that maybe could make it so you can charge, I guess, like recharge?
Yeah. So definitely we have the capability to charge. Some of our products do that actually look exactly like this for brain stimulation, deep brain stimulation. We can actually recharge them. The challenge with these, they're life-sustaining devices. So that patient compliance, putting that burden on the patient to charge their devices is not something that we want to put on the patient as far as the burden goes. If they forget, if they put it off, these life-sustaining devices, they can't deliver therapy if their batteries are dead. So that's a design constraint we put on our designs to say we're going to have a primary cell device that lasts 10 years, 15 years, 20 years for some devices. It's a really good question, but yeah, so we have the technology to recharge. It's just for these life-sustaining devices, we don't put that technology in.
So 2 questions. First, just out of curiosity, how do you remove the Micra after it's been implanted? And then secondly, what kind of is there any sort of benchmark you could give us to get an idea of what kind of power draw it actually has, or what processing power it actually has in the grand scale of things?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So to answer your first question. So I don't know if you can see it here. There's this little button right here. See this guy right here? So this gets, imagine my hand here is the right ventricle. So the device gets inserted like that, and there's this little button here. So that's called an extraction feature. So there's a catheter that actually will get inserted into the patient, and you kind of lasso that extraction feature. And so that is an opportunity to extract the Micra device. There's no guarantee that you can extract the Micra device, because once this gets implanted, there's thrombosis and there's tissue that builds up around this. And this is a feature here that actually tries to stop the tissue growth up to this point. But sometimes it fully encapsulates the device, and you can't get it out. And so sometimes the way that this design is designed is that once it gets to the end of the battery life, it'll kind of shut itself down so that if you can't get it out, it's not going to interfere with another device. And if the patient still needs another device, one might get placed right next to it. So some patients might actually have 2 of these devices implanted. And then from a power draw perspective, your second question. So this device draws different power than this device for sure. But they really don't draw a lot. So I answered a question earlier today around, kind of comparing this. So amps of current from a battery. These are drawing nanoamps of current from a battery. So you kind of think of a 180 milliamp hour battery or so that might be in this device. And it's got to last 10 years. You don't get a lot of current to play with to deliver therapy. So these are the background current drain on some of these electronics is in the tens, hundreds of nanoamps, so very small. So even from a device heating perspective, it's not really a concern that we have because you're not talking about a lot of wattage in these components. Good questions.
Going from working at a place like Unisys to going to working at a place like Medtronic, this is maybe more of a theoretical question, but do you find working at Medtronic to be maybe more fulfilling or more interesting than you would say working at Unisys was?
A good question. I would say they're different. I don't know if I would say more fulfilling, less fulfilling, better or worse. They're just different. Working at a company like Unisys and the complexity of the problems to solve just from a compute platform, definitely challenging, definitely fun. Working at a place like Medtronic where you have these competing challenges of shrinking electronics, keeping the current drain down, these challenging environmental conditions, also fun, also challenging. So it's hard to rate them against each other to say one's better, one's worse. I will say this, working at Medtronic and seeing like the first video we saw where patients actually talk about their anecdotes about how our devices help them out, change their lives, that's really rewarding. That's not something I would have gotten from like a Unisys or something like that, but definitely that's a rewarding piece of it. Very fulfilling from that perspective.
So you mentioned you designed these specifically so they don't have to be removed for MRIs. I was just kind of wondering what exactly that entails. Like, is that mostly on the shell designer to isolate the inside from the
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges here. So from an MRI perspective, so MRI is a fluxating coil, a magnetic field, right? And so when you start to look at how this gets implanted, it starts to look like a loop, right? And so you can induce voltages. So there's a circuit challenge to say, can we stand off that voltage that gets induced? There's also a lead heating challenge. Like if there start to be, eddy currents or currents that flow back and forth, does this lead heat up? So there's challenges there. So there's multidisciplinary challenges here with just being able to work in an MRI environment. So it's hard to say it's an electrical problem, material sciences problem, a mechanical problem. There's a lot of challenges here. Even just the case here, a titanium case, making sure that that doesn't have current and heating and things like that that get induced in it. Good question.
How difficult was it to switch between such different roles in different industries, and like how did you learn the new skills you would need in a different industry?
Yeah, it's a good question. So as I kind of went from Unisys to Medtronic, I kind of dipped my toe in the water a little bit. So I was in computer architecture at Unisys. I was a chip lead there. And then kind of moving into Medtronic, I also kind of leaned into that when I got there because I got hired onto a project that was kind of changing their architecture, next generation architecture. So I was able to kind of master that. Once I got an understanding of that and had designs in place for that, I was able to kind of broaden my scope to more of the analog side, the tissue interface side. So as I kind of broadened my horizons and my scope, it just became more interesting and more interesting and more interesting. So initially it was shock and awe a little bit as you kind of say, oh, this is a lot different, a lot smaller, different challenges. Then I became aware of it, I acclimated to that, and then just kind of consumed it as the challenges kind of kept coming in. So it was a lot of fun.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, where did you sort of find the wiggle room to shrink down these devices so much, just for the pacemakers you have out there, and maybe if you can for current devices you're working on?
I didn't quite hear the question, sorry.
Sure. Yeah, so just out of curiosity, where do you find sort of that wiggle room to shrink down the devices just by that huge magnitude? And if possible, could you talk about sort of research you're doing into that right now? If that's not like...
We can't talk too much about the research, but just, if you drew a trend line between this device, and this device, you can kind of see where we're going if you draw the trend lines, right? So it's not a stretch of the imagination to think that we're trying to shrink things. The design challenges and kind of the wiggle room and things like that to kind of move from this to this, it's multidisciplinary, right? So I mentioned managing, keeping the same feature set, managing current drain. As we went from technology node to technology node, managing those challenges. So definitely the IC technology node gives us the opportunity to shrink the electronics, to go from this big of a chip down to this big of a chip. But when we do that, things like current drain, just the physics of reducing that technology node causes leakage current to go up. So now we have to employ design techniques to bring that current drain down. So we have very talented IC designers on our staff doing amazing things to reduce that current drain. And then also, the battery has less capability going from this size to this size. This is 20% roughly of the battery capability of this. So now we even have to further reduce our current drain profile. Again, amazing designers. Tricks of the trade, IP, secrets, patents that our designers employ. And that's from an electrical perspective. If there's any mechanical engineers, you have a similar type of challenge. kind of going from this size to this size. Battery folks, electrical chemical folks, similar type of challenge. Just being able to shrink down to have 20% of the capacity is a challenge. So there's different battery chemistries in these devices. So, good question.
So from a more humanitarian perspective, do you ever get stressed out by how the technology that you're creating is going into someone's like heart? Because like usually if an engineer like designs poorly, then their company just loses profit. But like if you design poorly, someone might like die.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
does it ever like stress you out?
Yep. And that's a really good question. Fortunately, we have. It's not a It's not a single designer that creates one of these, right? So there's a huge team. And we go through a lot of design reviews, a lot of testing. So the team kind of bears the burden of making sure that this device is going to work from all aspects, from an electrical perspective, from a mechanical perspective, from a battery perspective, from a software perspective, that the design is going to work. So it's not any one individual. And that's actually the beauty of developing something like that. We can all kind of feed off each other and challenge each other to make sure the design is coming out like we expect it to. And also keep in mind, there's a lot of testing involved, a lot of use case testing. You think of your iPhone, you get a new iPhone every year. You can't get a new one of these every year. Just you physically can't go through that testing, the amount of testing that's required to make sure that this is not going to hurt somebody or harm someone inadvertently. So, good question.
Well, I think that's all the time we have. Once again, thank you for coming and speaking to us. We really appreciate it.